My breath caught as the floor creaked under me. Oh God, if Brian hears this, my world collapses. What are we doing, tangled in this mess, with Jackson's eyes locked on mine like he's peeling back every secret I've ever buried? Before we dive into this story, write where you're watching this video from and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I was stirring a pot of chicken noodle soup on the stove when I heard it, a faint rustling sound drifting down from upstairs. The house was quiet otherwise, just the hum of the fridge in our little Oregon kitchen. My husband Brian was pulling a late shift at the shop, and my 24-year-old stepson Jackson was holed up in his room like always. It wasn't unusual for him to be up there, probably scrolling through his phone or playing some game. But that rustling, it bugged me. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, grabbed a couple of plates to set the table, and figured I'd call him down for dinner. "Jackson, you hungry?" I shouted, but no answer came. Typical. I climbed the creaky stairs, the smell of soup fading behind me. His door was cracked open, just enough for a sliver of light to spill into the hall. I nudged it wider with my foot and peeked in. There he was, hunched over his laptop, the screen casting a blue glow across his face. At first I thought he was watching a video, maybe a car review, since he's obsessed with fixing up that old Mustang in the garage. But then I saw it. Pictures. My pictures. Old ones from a beach trip years ago. Me in a red swimsuit, laughing with a drink in my hand. Photos I'd forgotten about, buried in some dusty box. My stomach dropped. Why was he looking at those? I took a step closer and the floor creaked under me. Jackson spun around, his eyes wide like a kid caught sneaking cookies. "Caitlin!" he yelped, slamming the laptop shut. I didn't even think. I bolted. My heart pounded as I stumbled back into the hallway, leaning against the wall to catch my breath. What had I just walked into? Downstairs, I busied myself with the soup again, ladling it into bowls even though my hands were shaking. Jackson didn't come down and I didn't call him again. I sat at the table alone, staring at the steam rising from my bowl, replaying it in my head. Those photos weren't a secret, not really. Just snapshots from a summer trip with friends before Brian and I got serious. But seeing them on Jackson's screen felt wrong. Personal. Like he'd crossed a line I didn't even know was there. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing. He could have found them in the garage, gotten curious. He's 24, not a kid anymore, but still. Why me? Why those? I took a sip of soup, barely tasting it, and told myself to let it go. People stumble across old stuff all the time, right? No big deal. Except it was. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that glow on his face, those pictures flickering, and his startled look when he caught me watching. I'm 46 now, not some clueless newbie to life. I've had my share of awkward moments. Heck, I once spilled coffee on my boss during a meeting and laughed it off. But this stuck with me. I kept asking myself, should I say something, call him out, or just pretend it never happened? The practical side of me said to drop it. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill, Caitlin. But another part, quieter and sharper, whispered, what if it's more than that? By the time I finished eating, the house was dead silent again. Jackson stayed upstairs, and I didn't hear a peep. I rinsed my bowl, stacked it in the sink, and stood there, staring out the window at the dark backyard. I could have marched back up there, demanded an explanation. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. Instead, I turned off the kitchen light and headed to bed, telling myself it'd blow over. Except deep down, I knew it wouldn't. Something had shifted and I couldn't unsee it. Why was he looking at me like that? And why couldn't I stop wondering about it? The next few days after catching Jackson with those photos were weird. I'd set the table for dinner and we'd sit there, forks scraping plates, not saying a word. Brian was still pulling long shifts, so it was just us in the house, drowning in silence. I kept busy, scrubbing counters, folding laundry, anything to avoid thinking about it. But it gnawed at me. Why those pictures? Why me? Then one evening, I was on the couch flipping through a magazine when Jackson plopped down next to me. He was fidgeting, tugging at the hem of his faded green tee, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Caitlin, I'm sorry you saw that," he mumbled, eyes glued to the floor. "I didn't mean for it to happen." His voice was shaky, and for a second I felt bad for him. I forced a smile, trying to play it cool. "Hey, no biggie. We all stumble into stuff sometimes. Let's just forget it, okay?" He nodded, but then he looked up and his next words hit me like a punch. "I saw you too, you know, in the garage, digging through those old letters." I froze. My mouth went dry. He meant the box of letters from my ex, tucked away in a corner of the garage under a pile of camping gear. I'd pulled them out a few months back late at night just to read them one last time before tossing them. I thought I was alone. "What are you talking about?" I said, but my voice cracked, giving me away. Jackson shrugged, a little smirk tugging at his lips. "Just saying, we've both got our secrets." My heart started racing. I wanted to snap at him, tell him it's none of his business. But I didn't. Instead, I stood up, muttering something about checking the dishwasher, and bolted to the kitchen. Leaning against the counter, I tried to steady my breathing. Those letters were personal. A piece of my past I'd never shared with Brian or anyone. How long had Jackson known, and why bring it up now? Later that night, I caught him watching me while I poured coffee. Not a quick glance. His eyes lingered, warm and steady, like he was trying to figure me out. I turned away fast, pretending to fuss with the sugar jar, but my stomach flipped. What was that? I'm 46, not some teenager with a crush. But there it was, a spark I couldn't ignore. I shook my head, telling myself I was overreacting. He's my stepson, this is nuts. Still, I couldn't let it go. Over the next couple days, I started noticing things. The way he'd linger in the doorway when I was cooking, asking random questions about my day. Or how he'd brush past me in the hall, closer than he needed to. I kept it casual. "Hey, you working tomorrow?" But inside I was a mess. Was I imagining this? Or was something shifting between us, something I didn't want to name? By Friday, I was done pretending it was nothing. I cornered myself in the bathroom mirror, staring hard. "Caitlin, get a grip," I said out loud. "He's Brian's kid. You're married. This is in your head." But was it? I thought about those photos again, and his smirk when he mentioned the letters. He wasn't just apologizing, he was testing me, seeing how I'd react. And the worst part? A tiny piece of me liked it. Liked that he'd noticed me, that he'd cared enough to dig. I splashed cold water on my face and decided to keep my distance. No more late-night chats, no more excuses to bump into him. But as I climbed into bed that night, the house creaking around me, I couldn't stop wondering, what did he see in me? And why couldn't I shake this feeling that we were headed somewhere we shouldn't go? It had been a week since Jackson dropped that line about the letters, and the air in the house felt thick, like we were both waiting for something to snap. I was wiping down the kitchen counter late one night when I heard the front door bang open. Jackson stumbled in, his boots scuffing the floor, a goofy grin plastered on his face. He'd clearly been out with his buddies. His breath smelled faintly of beer, and he nearly knocked over the coat rack. "Caitlin!" he slurred, catching himself on the wall. "Shh, Brian's asleep," I hissed, rushing over to steady him before he woke the whole neighborhood. He leaned on me heavier than I expected, and I half dragged him toward the kitchen. "You're going to get us in trouble," I whispered, flicking on the light. He just chuckled, those hazel eyes glinting. "You're always so worried about me." I rolled my eyes, grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "Yeah, well, someone's got to be. Sit." I shoved the glass of water at him, but his shaky hands fumbled it, and it hit the counter, spilling everywhere. "Oops," he said, laughing. I groaned, snatching a rag to mop it up. "Come on, Jackson. Focus." As I leaned over to wipe the mess, he shifted closer, his knee brushing mine. "You're real cool, Caitlin, you know that?" His voice was soft, almost serious, and I froze mid-wipe. I glanced up, and he was staring at me, not drunk, stupid staring, but something deeper. My throat tightened. "Thanks," I muttered, turning back to the counter. but he didn't let it drop. No, I mean it, you're always there. I tossed the rag in the sink, trying to laugh it off. Okay, buddy, you've had enough for one night. But then the lights flickered, storm rolling in outside, and the room went dark for a split second. When they buzzed back on, he was right there, inches away. My heart slammed against my ribs, and before I could think, it happened. We didn't plan it, didn't say a word, then it just did. A moment later I pulled back, breathless, my hands trembling. This is a mistake, I stammered, stepping away fast. Jackson blinked, like he was waking up from a dream, and nodded slow. Yeah, you're right. But his eyes didn't agree. They stayed locked on me, heavy with something I couldn't name. I turned, gripping the edge of the sink, trying to steady myself. What the hell just happened? I'm 46, married, and he's Brian's son. This wasn't some rom-com. This was real life, and I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Jackson, go to bed, I said, my voice sharper than I meant. He stood, wobbling a little, and shuffled toward the stairs. I heard his door click shut upstairs, and I sank into a chair, staring at the wet spot on the counter. My mind raced. Was it the beer talking for him, or had he meant it? And me? What was my excuse? I'd felt it too, that pull, and I didn't stop it. I pressed my fingers to my lips, still feeling the heat, and hated myself for it. I should have sent him straight upstairs when he walked in. Should have kept my distance like I'd planned. But I didn't, and now here I was, a mess of guilt and questions. Did he feel bad too, or was he already passed out, forgetting the whole thing? I wanted to believe it was a fluke, a dumb slip we could bury, but deep down I knew better. That look he gave me, it wasn't nothing, and the way my heart wouldn't slow down, that wasn't nothing either. How was I supposed to face him tomorrow? Or Brian? What had I just started? The morning after that kitchen mess, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. My stomach churned all night, replaying what happened with Jackson. I had to end it, whatever it was, before it spiraled further. Brian was still asleep, snoring loud enough to rattle the walls, so I slipped on my robe and marched to Jackson's room. His door was shut, but I didn't knock. I pushed it open and found him sitting on the bed, scrolling his phone, still in last night's jeans. He glanced up, surprised. "Caitlin?" "We need to talk," I said, crossing my arms tight. "Last night was a mistake, it stops here." My voice was firm, even if my hands shook. Jackson's face shifted, first confusion, then something darker. "You serious?" he asked, setting his phone down slow. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm married. You're Brian's son. This can't happen." He leaned back, staring at me like he was sizing me up. "Okay, Caitlin," he said finally, his tone flat. "If that's what you want." I turned to leave, relieved it was over, but that look in his eyes stuck with me. The day dragged on, me folding laundry, him banging around in the garage. I thought we'd dodged a bullet. Then Brian got home early, dropping his keys on the counter with a tired grunt. "Hey, hun," he called. I was in the living room, digging through a box of old photos I'd pulled out to hide those beach shots. My hands froze when I heard his boots on the floor. He walked in, frowning at the mess. "What's this?" he asked, nodding at the box. Before I could answer, Jackson strolled in behind him, hands in his pockets, casual as anything. "Tell him, Caitlin," he said, his voice sharp. "About us." My heart stopped. Brian turned to me, eyebrows shooting up. "What's he talking about?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, just a choked sound. Jackson smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "Go on, tell him what happened last night." "Jackson, stop it!" I snapped, my face burning. Brian stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Caitlin, what's going on?" I scrambled for words. "It's not, he's twisting it. He came home drunk and I just helped him." But Jackson cut me off. "Helped me, huh? That's one way to put it." He turned to Brian. "Ask her why she was in my face at midnight." Brian's jaw tightened and I saw the doubt creep into his eyes. I wanted to scream, to shake Jackson and make him take it back. "Brian, listen to me," I begged. "He's making it sound worse than it was." But Brian just stared, silent, like he was piecing it together wrong. Jackson shrugged and walked out, leaving me drowning in the wreckage. I turned to Brian, desperate. I swear, it's not what he's saying. He rubbed his face, voice low. Then what is it, Caitlin? 'Cause I don't get this. I sank onto the couch, hands in my hair, trying to explain without breaking everything. But before I could, Jackson yelled from the hall, "Check her phone if you don't believe me." My blood ran cold. I hadn't texted him, hadn't done anything. But then I remembered. A week ago, I'd sent him a quick, "You okay?" after he stormed out during an argument. Innocent, but out of context. It had looked bad. Brian's eyes flicked to my phone on the table and he reached for it. "Wait," I started, lunging forward, but he already had it. He scrolled, then stopped, his face going pale. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, holding up a photo I'd never seen. Me and Jackson, close, laughing, time-stamped last night. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share it with your friends if you enjoyed it.
This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.